So in this video we're going to be taking a look at adding extra details to our model. So one method that we're going to look at is finding a border for like a polygroup and then making a curve and then running a tube along that curve, and that can be pretty nice. The other thing we're going to look at is adding insert mesh brushes into our design. So let's take a look first at adding some tubing around some of our polygroups. So let's just go ahead and I'm going to select this shape that you see here. I'm going to hold down Control and Shift, and we've got on select rectangle, and I'm going to be looking at this here. Now I'm going to hit Alt S, which I've made a hotkey for myself for the solo button. So we're just looking at just this piece here. We'll turn on polyframe as well. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to get rid of some of this stuff real quick, just so we're looking at something clean. I'm going to go to the stroke palette and I'm going to dock this thing. So I'm going to click and drag this right here and push it over on this section. Then we're going to open up this curve functions area. So we're going to open this, and you can see there's different ways that we can frame our mesh with a curve. So we can use either the border, which is what we see here, or we can do polygroups, which if we have the whole entire object visible, it'll outline all the different polygroups, or you can do creased edges. So we're just going to work with the border. We're going to work with one piece at a time, and I'll go ahead and hit frame mesh. And now that gives us this nice curve that we can work with. So we're going to use a brush that actually makes tubing, and if you've got a pre-selected curve like what we got here, it'll actually take that tube and push it all the way through the entire thing. So let's tap B, and then we'll go tap C for our curves, and then we've got curve tube. So we'll go ahead and click on that, and you can see it recognizes this this thing here. Now I don't have symmetry turned on. If I have symmetry turned on, it'll try to do this entire curve for an X on both sides, negative and positive, and then it'll cause some problems. So turn off symmetry whenever you're using this, and then whatever your brush size is, this red cursor is going to determine how thick that tubing is. So I'm going to have to tap S. I'm going to make this thing pretty darn small, like that. And I'll go ahead and click on that. And you can see that's going to build up this nice tubing for us. And so if I'm happy with this, I can just go ahead and click off the model here like that. And let's turn off polyframe, and you can see what it's built. So it did the border, but it only made this piece, because you can see this is an open edge here and this is an open edge here. So what we're gonna have to do is, if we're happy with this, we can go ahead and leave it. You can see it's going to mask off the rest of the model, so you do have this opportunity to put it on something like the move brush. You could do polishing on it. If you do polish, you can actually make this thing a little bit thinner, but the values have a pretty big effect on it, so you might want to just be a little bit careful on that. So you can see I just made that a little bit thinner. So with the move brush, we can actually take this, and I'll turn on symmetry at this point, and we could pull this thing down just a little bit. You could also use the you can smooth. So I get the smooth brush, and I can kind of pull that corner in just a little bit. Maybe you did it a little bit too much there. Kind of have it fade into that. So there's that. I'll get rid of the mask on this thing, show just that piece again, and we'll do under the stroke type, we're going to use the frame mesh, and since this is the only thing that's visible, it's going to make this border here. I did turn on symmetry, so I'm going to tap X. I'm going to go back to brush, C for curve, and do the curve tube. And my brush size, I think I had a size of about 3 or 4. So I'll leave it at 4. And now I'll click on this line, and you can see it makes this piece here. So it looks a little thick. So again, I can tap here and go make that 3. If I can get that number on there just right. Yeah, it's at 3. And now I can click it again, and it will resize the thing. So, you know, obviously if we make the brush size really large, we'll get the big tube like this. And if we drag it down to 3, we can click it and do that. So again, when you're done, just click off the mesh like that. Click it one time, and you've got the opportunity to do something with it because everything else is masked, or you can leave it like that. So that produces a pretty cool look. The other thing we'll do is we'll look at using insert mesh brushes. Okay, before I do that, I'm going to give myself, I know I'm going to insert something that's kind of like a circular shape. So I'm going to use this slice circle. We haven't really looked at that yet, but that's the same thing that if we hold on Control Shift, the slice curve, we've got rectangles, and we also have slice circle. So I'm going to put on slice circle right here, like that. The other thing, I think on my interface over here, if I hold this down to actually use the tool, I've got this square and center, and really what I'm doing, I built this up to where I stole the pieces off of here for the stroke type is where it's at. So if you go here, it's actually set to circle whenever you use this thing, and there's this square and center. With square and center, it just makes a perfect circle, and it drags out from the center like that. If we don't have that on, you can drag out ellipse kind of shapes, and if you add the spacebar modifier, you can move this thing around. So I want a perfect circle, so I'm going to use square and center. Again, that sits up in here. So I can drag this thing out like this, and I'm just going to make this piece here. I'm going to zoom in, and I want to add another section like this, and maybe another one here. And here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is take this piece here with move, hold on Control, and just click on that and kind of move this thing out like that. And I want to take this piece right here, and I actually want to smooth it a bit and do the polish by feature, trying to get that recessed in there. So if I click this whole thing and mask this, I can do the polish by feature. Turn off polyframe just so we kind of see what we're getting with this thing. And again, if we want to smooth that mask out just a little bit and have it affect the outer part, we can do that. So here I am with a situation where I'm not too happy with the geometry that is going on here. You can see it is a little bit low res, and it's producing this kind of really faceted kind of look. So again, we looked at how we can add localized detail, but we can use this to also fix maybe a particular area. So I'm going to hide everything but this and hit Control D to add another subdivision level to this particular area. And I'm going to hide everything except for this right here, mask it, bring everything back, invert the mask, and then polish by feature just a little bit, and you can see it cleans up some of that stuff. So you can see this isn't a perfect circle, but when we do the insert mesh, we'll be able to fix some of that, and because I'm going to be using a circular object, we'll be able to judge how far off I am on this shape here. I'm going to push this surface over again. I'm going to do mirror, then do mirror and weld. And now I've got that piece on both sides now. And here's the part where we've already looked at some videos on how to make insert meshes. So if you want to do that, go back and revisit those videos. But I've got a little library of brushes. These are normal kind of brushes, but then I also have a library of insert mesh brushes that I've made. And you can see these different pieces. And I'll just try to find something that I know that I think is kind of cool for a shape. And I'm going to use this piece right here like that. And so whenever you click and drag out this insert mesh brush, it should take into account something about the surface normal. So I can click and drag that thing out like that. And I'm going to make it a little bit larger right around there. And then I'll go ahead and put it on the transpose tool. It knows the angle that the brush was drawn out at whenever you put it on the transpose tool. So that comes in quite handy, and I can just kind of pull this thing out just a little bit like this. And here's where I was talking about this surface that we made is not perfectly circular, and we now have this opportunity. You can see everything is masked off except for the insert mesh brush, because that's just a cool thing that ZBrush does for you that allows you to move this thing around. You know, I pulled it forward, but we can move this thing around this way as well. All I have to do is hit Control I to inverse our mask, and then now put it on the move brush, and I can start to tweak this surface and try to get it to match up a little bit more with the shape on this. So it is kind of eyeballing this thing. It's not perfect, but it can at least get you a really nice look for things. So I'll hold down Control and get rid of my mask, and then there's the final detail that I got. So again, I didn't have symmetry turned on, so this is not a big deal. We've looked at this so many times. We can just go ahead and mirror that, and then do the mirror and weld functionality, and we've got this thing back. So that's how you can take a look at adding these things, adding the little frills along the edges here with this tubing, and then start to use insert mesh brushes. And this is the point where you really start to get things nice and polished up. So I'm going to show my other model that I have, and then hide everything. Well, I'm going to show everything except we're hiding these new pieces that we were working on. And you can see with the different techniques that I've shown you, that's pretty much what how this was built up. Now all these little pieces here, like this vent, this is actually an insert mesh brush, and these are actually insert mesh brushes for these little rivets and things like that. And you can see I've added areas of localized detail to do some of these pieces here. There's tubing along these different shapes. I guess I could show you on these rivets if you want to make sure that they're the right size. We've already looked at it in another video, but it wouldn't be bad to just highlight that real quick. So I'm going to select this piece of geo, hold down Shift, click the eye icon, and now I can just turn on these pieces here. So while we're using these insert mesh brushes, I do have one that is like these little screw heads, and if I tap M, I've actually got a little library. So I've got one that looks like the screw head here, or I can use this guy here, which I kind of like. And I'll make my brush size the size I want for these rivets, and let's make it a little bit smaller here, and then I'll go ahead and click and drag out and hold down Control, and it'll snap to the size of my brush. That's a little too large. I'm going to drag this down about to here. So I kind of like that size. And then now if I want to just keep adding these, I just hold down Control as I drag out a little bit, and then hold down Control, and it actually makes that brush conform to that size. So then that way I can make sure that I'm consistent with all these little rivets, and that's what we've got in the real world. For the most part, you would probably have the same size for these different things. And now this just becomes extra little stuff that you're adding, and it can really start to build up and make the model look a lot more complex than what it really is as far as what you've modeled. But you've kind of done the work up front, and hopefully that doesn't crash on me, but I'm doing the mirror and weld because I started turning as I was doing the mirror and weld. But there's a lot of different brushes that you can get from ZBrush Central and with these different insert mesh brushes, and then you could make your own as well on top of it. So I guess something to just kind of note, you saw it took a little while to actually mirror this thing across. That's probably because my poly count on these insert mesh brushes are pretty dense, and when you start adding a lot of these pieces to the model, it can really start to up the poly count on it. So one thing that you can do to make sure that you're going to be able to add this kind of detail and then separate this from the bigger part of the model and keep the poly counts separate on these things is we could put on a select rectangle, and I could select a piece on here like this. There's some functionality in ZBrush for growing a selection out. We looked at, like, if you hit Control Shift X will actually grow selection out, but any model piece that's actually connected together, you can hit Control Shift A and it'll grow the entire thing out for everything that's touching. And that's under visibility. You can see there's the grow, selection, shrink, and then if you do grow all, you can see the hotkeys for that. So that gives us this part of the model. Now we can hold on Control Shift, drag in the open viewport, and get the inverse of that. And then I want to add these tubes. I don't know. Maybe we split the tubes off, but I'll keep it together with everything. So I'll hold on Control and Shift, click on that piece, and this here. And then now we have just those little rivets and everything else. Those insert mesh brushes are actually separated out. And if you remember from our earlier videos, it should be obvious what we're going to do now. We're going to go to the subtool section. We're going to go to split and say split hidden. And then so now these little pieces are actually their own separate model. This thing's its own model now, so we can turn everything on together with the visor, and we've got these different pieces. But this allows you to, build up some really high dense model detail on here, keep the poly count for that separate than this build file that you have here for like the overall kind of shape, and that'll help with performance. But it is kind of a step that you can do at the end. Now the interesting thing is, after you've got these things kind of split off, and if I show this piece here, it is possible that you can still insert, like when you're working with this model, it really wants you to kind of insert off of something that's already there. But sometimes there's enough distance that's kind of close enough to this thing where it kind of picks up the fact that you've got this model underneath of it. So if I hold down Control, let me get my brush size back down to something similar to that size we had before. So I guess it's like 7. But you can see I'm on this new model that we split off, but because I'm close enough to this thing, ZBrush will still take into account that shape, and it'll allow me to keep drawing off of here. So it doesn't always work, but whenever it does, it's pretty cool that this thing's separated out and it still feels as if I'm drawing that detail on this model here, like that. So that's again, these are all the different techniques that were used to build the hard surface model that I have, and hopefully this is going to be enough for you to start exploring some of your ideas for the hard surface thing. I always kind of shied away from the hard surface stuff and always stuck to organic, because in programs like Maya you have to model all these little different cuts and all these different bevels and things like that, and it was a very time consuming process. Inside of ZBrush, these new tools that they've created really allows me to just kind of explore shapes and kind of have fun, and it still feels like sculpting still to me. So I know this is a lot of work, and you do have to understand a big portion of ZBrush, their interface, where tool sits and things like that. But if you kind of take yourself through these steps that I've shown you, I think you can build a pretty minimal interface with minimal buttons on the side and still get everything that you're looking for and still be able to have fun and build some really kind of cool and complex shapes.